Okay, I'm going to test you just a little bit this morning. I want you to really think about this. I want you to really try to figure this out. If you know the story, what does a squirrel have to do with the story of Elijah and the contest on Mount Carmel? I can see from the looks on your faces you have no idea. Do what? It might be. It might be.
Squirrel has a bunch of nuts.
A bunch of nuts, yeah. Any other guesses? I mean,
I chopped wood for the fire, and that took away the squirrel's home.
oh no. Oh no. Chopped the wood for the fire and took away the squirrel's home. Oh. Okay. I'm impressed. Not because you knew the answer to my question, but because you knew the story. That's awesome. If you know the story of, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, if you know anything about the story of Elijah and the contest that went on in Mount Carmel, and you try to figure out, okay, what does a squirrel have to do with that? How many of you have been driving along the road and a squirrel run out in front of you? What happens next? What does he do? Huh? You run over it? You mean bump, bump? yeah. Well, what happens? You see the squirrel, and he darts across the road, and he gets to the other side, almost to the other side, and he sees you coming. Oh, no, there's a car coming. What do? I got to go back. Stupid squirrel. So he turns around and goes back, and he gets halfway back and says, this is a long way. Wait a minute. I need to go back the other way. And he just darts back and forth, and you don't know which way to swerve. You don't know what to do. And then the next thing you know, bump, bump. You know? I mean, the middle of the road is not a good place for that squirrel to be, is it? I mean, this is what happens. This is what happens, you know. They can't make up their mind. They straddle in the middle of the road. They won't go one way or the other. Does this scenario have any connection with the story of Elijah and the contest on Mount Carmel? I kind of think it does. Let me explain to you as we look at this story. Now, I'm going to kind of briefly talk about the story. It's a fun story anyway, but we'll briefly talk about it. During the time of Elijah, God's people had been participating in the worship of Baal for many years. And so Elijah said to the people in 1 Kings chapter 18 and verse 21, Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow Him. But if Baal is God, follow him. In other words, you need to decide. You need to make a decision. Who are you going to follow? God or Baal? Because you can't just hang out in the middle of the road. That doesn't work. And that's what Elijah's trying to tell these people and asking them the question, who are you going to serve? Who are you going to follow? Which one's God? You can't keep wavering between two opinions. What happened to the squirrel that did that? Bump, bump. It's a familiar sound, you know? It's not a good place to be. Guess what? Guess what the people in Elijah's time said after he asked that question? They said nothing. Why? They wouldn't make a decision. They were just hanging out the road. Which way do I go? They wouldn't make the decision. Elijah said, look, you need to make a choice. And so he came up with this contest. He offered to have this contest between him and the 450 prophets of Baal. And of course, there were a lot of other people there. And the contest was that the 450 prophets of Baal would build their altar and put their bull or whatever, their sacrifice on this. and then he would build an altar and put his sacrifice on it, and whichever god burned up that offering, that would be the true God. And they said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I'm not sure why they thought it was a good idea, honestly, because I'm not sure they've ever seen Baal do anything in the past. But they said, yeah, that sounds good to us. We could do that. So, first, the 450 prophets of Baal, they built their altar, the rocks and whatever, put the wood and the animal on top for the offering. And so they began to pray to Baal. Oh, Baal, hear us. Listen to us. Come down and burn up our sacrifice. And they did this from morning until noon. They were praying to their god, Baal, to come and consume their sacrifice. Oddly enough, there was no answer. Nothing happened. And so they began to kind of dance around. They were getting desperate, and you know, worshiping Baal is kind of a wild thing anyway. So they began dancing around, and nothing was happening. They were praying, "Oh Baal, come on now, come down and worship or burn up our sacrifice." And they actually even began to take their swords and lance themselves, cut themselves, and dancing around. And they were really getting into this, and they were waiting on Baal to come down. He's going to come down and do it. Oh, he's going to do it. Let's just keep after it. And so they kept on. And all this was going on. About noon, Elijah finally, you know, it's been a long time now. And he starts to taunt them just a little bit. Maybe you need to shout louder. Surely he's a God. Maybe he's just in deep thought. Or maybe he's busy. Maybe he's away on a trip. Maybe he's traveling somewhere. Oh, I know. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe if you shout louder, you can wake him up and he'll come down and answer your prayer and burn up your sacrifice, your offering. Well, that just got them stirred up that much more. And so they're just frantic and they're dancing around and they're come on, burn up our sacrifice, come on. And they really thought this was going to happen. I guess. If I didn't think something was going to happen, I don't think I'd be cutting myself. You know, they believed in this. But nothing. And then Elijah came up and he put 12 stones. Why 12 stones? For the 12 tribes. So he put 12 stones, put the wood, put the offering, the sacrifice. And he took jars of water. Oh, first of all, and he dug a big ditch around the sacrifice. A big ditch, and the dirt, you know, was outside of the ditch. He dug the ditch. Then he took jugs of water and poured it over the sacrifice, over the wood, over the stones, and even filled up the ditch. And I guess the point is, if this happens, it wasn't going to be because he snuck a big lighter out there and started it. He soaked it. It wasn't going to burn naturally. Once he got prepared, in verse 36, Elijah said, "Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." And he didn't have to wait all day. He didn't have to dance. He didn't have to cut himself. Immediately, fire came out of heaven and consumed not only the animal sacrifice and the wood, but the stones and the water that had filled up the ditch, and even the dirt that was dug out of the ditch. I'm going to tell you something. It's kind of hard to burn rocks. And I don't know if you've ever tried to burn dirt, but it doesn't work very well. This consumed it all. This was no natural thing that happened. This was the power of God. And when all the people saw this, they fell down and they cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." They tried this other thing with Baal. That didn't work. Now they're saying, "The Lord, He is God." These people were so impressed. I mean, they wanted a God like this. A God that was powerful like that. A God who could get things done. A God that they could depend on. That they could turn to when they needed things. And at that moment, they saw a God that was powerful. And they were overwhelmed by that. They wanted this God with their whole hearts. And yet, it's not long after the story that we see people worshiping Baal again. I mean, they were so impressed with the power of God. They wanted God. They wanted this kind of a God. And yet, now they're serving Baal again, which did nothing. And my question is, what happened? What happened? It's the story of the squirrel. The Lord is who I want to serve, but Baal, we really enjoyed going to the temple and worshiping. But the Lord is powerful, but Baal, it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun when we worship. But the Lord, He is strong and He can do. But Baal, we had a lot of fun going to the temple and worshiping with the prostitutes. But then there's God, but then there's Baal, and God, bump, bump. I mean, we look at these people trying to make up their mind between serving the Lord and Baal, and sometimes we don't understand how it could even be hard to make that decision. How is it hard to make that choice? Baal is nothing. It's a block of wood that somebody carved out and maybe put gold on it or whatever that statue looks like. But Baal represented lust and partying and having a good time. That's why they went that way. The Lord wanted someone that would serve Him. People that wanted to be special. People that wanted to be set apart. People that wanted to be like their God. To try to become holy like their God. See, the Bible calls these people that go back and forth between these opinions, like these people did at that time, the Bible calls them double-minded. Have you ever read that in the Bible? He calls them double-minded. So, question is, we look at these people in this story and we think, man, I can't even understand why they would do that. So the question is, what does that have to do with us today? Surely we're not like them. We're not double-minded. Are we? Let me ask you a question. Do we waver between two opinions? I understand that we're not trying to decide between the Lord and Baal. But what about the Lord and the world? It just got personal, didn't it? It just came home, didn't it? What about between the Lord and the world? And if you really think about it, it's the same choice. It's the same choice that Elijah was warning them about then and said, you're going to have to choose. Because the world has a strong pull on us, just like the worship of Baal did for them. So are we like the squirrel? Are we like the squirrel? Well, the Lord offers so much, but God, He is holy and righteous, and we can be. But the world is so much fun. But then there's God and the promise of redemption and the promise of heaven. But then there's the world. Bump, bump. Are we like the squirrel? I mean, it's the same thing as we look at them and say, why did they not just make the easy decision? Well, why don't we? Why don't we make the easy decision? Look at what James has to say about double-mindedness. In James chapter 4, beginning of verse 4, I've got it up on the screen. Listen to this carefully. You adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again. If you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. Do you think the scriptures have no meaning? They say that God is passionate, that the Spirit He has placed within us should be faithful to Him. Now really pick up on what James is saying here. Listen to this, because it's easy to just read this and then move on to the next verse in some of our Bible readings and things like this. But I want us to really get this. Listen to this. First of all, he calls them adulterers. And he says, if you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God. And then it says that God is passionate. I like that thought, that God is actually passionate, that the Spirit He placed within us remains faithful to Him. He's passionate about that. These Christians that James is writing to are having the same squirrel problem that we do, and that they had back in Elijah's time. And you might even be thinking, well, what does this mean, friendship with the world? What exactly does that mean? Or what, are they partying too much? Is that what it is? It's not even what you think. It's really not what you think. Because if you look at the passage in James in the previous verses, before he made this statement, James said these people are living according to worldly wisdom. He says, listen to this, see if this doesn't sound familiar. He says they're selfish, they're jealous of each other, they're boasting, they're lying, their ambition is such a driving force in their lives that it's causing them to fight and argue among one another. It doesn't say that they're partying too much. It doesn't say that they're visiting Baal and the prostitutes. It's just normal people in their lives that are going by the rules of the world, that are following the wisdom of the world. People that are selfish and jealous and boasting and lying, and their ambition is a driving force in their lives. But here's the crazy thing. Because the Christians that James is writing to have chosen the world over the Lord, he calls them adulterers. So spiritually speaking, what he's saying is these Christians are cheating on God with the world. God doesn't want you in the middle of the road. He doesn't want you to enjoy His blessings and enjoy the world and be all up in the world and all this. He says they're adulterers. They're not remaining faithful to me. They're cheating on God with the world. So, I look at this and that's exactly what it says. And I want to get this down to how we avoid this, how we keep from cheating on God. And the more I think about this, the more I think about the fact that we need in our lives a defining moment. We need a defining moment. There needs to be this defining moment in our lives when we choose to be single-minded. In other words, and I know there has been in my life, but all through my life, there was a defining moment in my life that changed. Something that just kind of clicked that says, I'm not going to be lukewarm. I'm not going to be in the middle. I'm going on this side, making a commitment. Have I always been successful with that? Not necessarily. But there was this one moment. But the reality is that most people are double-minded, not because they made a conscious decision to be double-minded, but because they didn't make a conscious decision not to be double-minded. The people in Elijah's time, they never had that defining moment. They just went with the crowd, just went with whatever. Just followed whatever was popular. And Baal was very popular. Oh, there was that time that they said, oh, we're going to serve God. But that they just went right back to the Baal, right back to the world, right back to bump, bump. This defining moment is the moment that you decide that you will change and have a life goal of following the Lord with all of your heart. Following the Lord with everything that you are, with everything that you have. And so, let's try to bring this home. Let's try to figure out, what does this defining moment look like? Let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean by a defining moment in one's life. Do y'all remember the story in the New Testament of Zacharias? Remember him? I'm sorry. Yeah. One of God's people, right? He was one of God's people before he even met the Lord. I said Zacchaeus, I'm sorry. Y'all remember Zacchaeus? I don't know why I said Zacharias. So, too many Z names. You know, he's the wee little guy. But anyway, he was one of God's people before he ever met the Lord. But he had this defining moment when Jesus decided to go to his house. You remember the change in him? When Jesus decided to go to his house, he said, I will give half of my goods to the poor. You know, if I've wrongfully taken anything, I'll restore it fourfold. He obviously made a change. There was a defining moment in his life to where he went from just a casual person of God to a dedicated person. That was his defining moment. How many of you know who Joseph of Arimathea is? Do you know his background? Do you realize that Joseph of Arimathea, the one who took the body of Jesus and buried it in his own tomb, you realize that he was a part of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court that condemned Jesus to death? They didn't know about him. They didn't know that he secretly was a follower of Christ. But Joseph had that defining moment. Joseph of Arimathea had that defining moment when he finally mustered up the courage to go to Pilate and ask for the body of Jesus so that he could bury it in his own tomb. Before that moment, nobody even knew he was a follower of the Lord. He was afraid to let it be known because he was a member of the Jewish council. The Jewish court. He was a member of the Sanhedrin that were trying to kill Jesus. But he had that defining moment when he said, enough. I'm going to let it be known that I am a follower of Jesus. No matter what anybody thinks, no matter what anybody says, that was his defining moment. I mean, these people, these examples, they may have kind of followed God. Kind of like a lot of people today. Oh, they kind of follow God. You know. But they were missing that defining moment in their lives. But after that moment, after that defining moment in their lives changed. Let me ask you something. Have you had that defining moment in your life yet? Not that casual, I kind of serve God. I go to church sometimes. I go to church all the time. I read my Bible sometimes. Have you had that actual defining moment that said, enough, I'm not going to be running back and forth in the middle of the road anymore. I'm going to make a decision. Have you had that yet? Only you can answer that. We have to have that moment. And then after our defining moment, we need to be faithful to God. In other words, we had this moment, and it's not just a fleeting moment, it's a life-changing moment. I think about the people on Mount Carmel and that decision when God came up and consumed the sacrifice, and they said, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." That's pretty cool. Let's go serve Baal. They had what looked like a defining moment and then walked away. The moment is not your defining moment unless you follow it by being faithful, totally faithful to God. Look at James chapter 4, beginning in verse 7. So humble yourself, James said, humble yourself before God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Listen to this. Come close to God and God will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up in honor. Concentrate on that just a minute. There's about to be a test. Look at the scripture. To be faithful to God, what does James tell us to do? Anything up there that clicks with you, what does James tell us to do? Humble yourself. What else? Resist the devil. Good. What else? Come close to God. Anything else? Get rid of sin. Anything else? Huh? Be loyal. Awesome. He said, if you want to be faithful to God, this is how you do it. This is where it begins. If you have that defining moment that something clicks and you make that decision, then this is what follows that. This is what in sequence comes next. He gives you instructions. Because he says, even in this verse, he said, you've been wavering. You've been divided between God and the Lord. It's almost like he said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Let there be tears for what you've done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Humble yourselves before the Lord. Here's the list I came up with. Be humble. Do things that will bring us closer to God. Get rid of sin. Purify our hearts. Don't let our loyalty be divided between the Lord and the world. And be truly sorry for how selfishly we've lived. James is very clear here. He doesn't beat around the bush. Christians who choose to continue, he's saying Christians that continue to live according to the wisdom of the world, driven by envy and ambition of the world and selfishly seeking what they want rather than what God wants, what they want above all else, they're just not being faithful to God. That's something to think about. Have you really made the decision, the choice between the world and the Lord? Just because you're here this morning doesn't mean that you have. Have you really made the choice between the world and the Lord? Elijah says, choose. James said to choose. They're saying you can't have it both ways. Because if you try to have it both ways, bump, bump. And we have to be honest with ourselves. Are we divided between the world and the Lord? Think about your life. Think about the whatever in your life. Are you divided? Or does God come first in every aspect of your life? When there's a decision between something in the world and God, who wins? Are we divided? Are we stuck in the middle of the road trying to decide? Because turning to God means turning your back on the world and the things of the world and on your own selfishness. Turning to God means that we place the utmost importance on our service to Him, on learning about Him, on worshiping Him, on talking to Him, on living for Him. I don't know if you realize this or not, but God cares which way you choose. And that's kind of sobering to think about, that God actually cares. It's like, why would God care about me? I mean, He's got enough other people that are going to be faithful to Him. He's got other people. Why does He care about me? But He does. He doesn't want you running back and forth or getting stuck in the middle of the road like the squirrel. He doesn't want in your life to hear bump, bump. He doesn't want that. God actually longs for us to be close to Him, if you can imagine that. God, the creator of the world, actually longs for you to have a relationship with Him, to be close to Him. That's why James said in James 4 and verse 5 that God is passionate. Remember we read that a few minutes ago? God is passionate that the Spirit He has placed within you should be faithful to Him. So He wants us to choose Him. And it breaks His heart when we decide to put the world in front of Him, to choose the world instead of Him. In fact, I think it breaks His heart when we just can't decide. I mean, does He not deserve to be the Lord of our lives? If we look at His power, if we look at all that He's done for us and given everything, He gave His Son for us to die on the cross so that we can be with Him for eternity. Does He not deserve to be first? This world's temporary anyway. What are we going to choose? Are we going to waver between the world and the Lord? We're going to waver between eternity and a world that's going to burn up? Wow. And yet we do it. We do it. There may be some of you here, someone here that needs to really think through this and have that moment. It may be that moment, that defining moment for you hasn't happened yet. In fact, it's possible that defining moment just happened. It's possible that it happened this morning, if it hasn't happened in the past. if you haven't done it, make the commitment. And follow that commitment with total faith in God. Total commitment to God. Not just an occasional, well, this is what I do on the side. I'm part of the world, and all this stuff that I am and accomplish and ambition and all this stuff. And oh, by the way, I just happen to be a Christian sometimes. Let's turn that around. Let's be a full-time Christian that just has to live in the world. I'm not saying that we can't enjoy the things of the world. God gave us things to enjoy. But those are a pleasure that He gave us, not to replace Him. But we are to be Christians first and foremost. And we are to be committed to Him first and foremost. And if we truly love Him and are dedicated to Him, and we had that defining moment and something in our head clicked that says, I don't care what anybody says, I don't care what anybody does, He is first. We can still enjoy the things of the world, as long as they are not the sinful things like Baal and that type of thing. Have you had that moment? Are you having it now? Maybe you'll go home this week and concentrate on some of the things we've talked about and decide this is it. If we can help you to if we can pray with you or pray for you and help you with that moment, help you with that commitment to God, we're here together to help each other. We are what do we call that? A family. We're not just a bunch of people thrown together. We're a bunch of people put together by God as a family. We're here to help each other. And if we can help you in any way this morning, let it be known while we stand and sing.